You ever catch yourself thinking about something that just feels, well, impossible?
Mm-hmm.
Like a dream that maybe predicted something,
Mm.
or you hear about a UFO sighting and it just, makes your head spin.
Yeah, absolutely.
Today, we're diving right into that fascinating territory.
We're going to explore Jeffrey J. Kripal's book, How to Think Impossibly, about souls, UFOs, time, belief, and everything else.
Right.
And look, you might normally just brush these topics aside, right?
Yeah, pretty easily.
But Kripal, he's a professor over at Rice University. He asks us to do something, well, really interesting with them.
He wants us to actually reconsider those experiences, the ones you'd normally dismiss out of hand.
Exactly. Things like near-death experiences or, encounters people have that just don't have an easy explanation.
Okay.
Instead of just slapping a label on them like weird or unreal, he's suggesting maybe they actually give us a peek into a much richer reality, a more complex one.
Mm-hmm. And just to be clear, our aim here in this deep dive, it isn't really about proving or disproving souls or aliens, is it?
No, not at all. What we want to do is get into Kripal's core arguments, understand this invitation he's giving us to think impossibly about these things that often get sidelined.
So it's about understanding a new perspective, a different way to maybe frame the boundaries of what we think is real.
That's it exactly, getting a new lens.
Okay, so this whole concept of impossible, that seems to be where Kripal really starts shaking things up.
Oh, absolutely. He doesn't see it as some fixed, unchanging law of the universe.
Not etched in stone.
Not at all. What's really kind of eye-opening is his argument that impossible is something we create. Humans create.
Right.
It's not inherent, but it grows out of the assumptions we hold about reality. And those assumptions, they change. They change depending on our culture, our historical period.
Okay. So something totally impossible now might have been, I don't know, perfectly normal back then? Or in another culture.
Precisely. And vice versa. It's all tied to the framework we're using at that specific moment.
So these events we call impossible.
Mm-hmm.
They're only impossible within that particular box.
That's his point. And he suggests, well, what if we shifted those underlying beliefs? That line we draw between possible and impossible,
Yeah.
it could just dissolve.
Wow. And Kripal isn't just talking about like extremely rare wild occurrences.
Right.
He actually says these so-called impossible experiences are, well, surprisingly common.
Yeah, he calls them fantastic yet commonplace. That's his phrase.
Fantastic yet commonplace. I like that.
He stresses they happen all the time. But our dominant way of thinking, especially materialism.
The idea that only physical stuff is real.
Right. That viewpoint tends to push these experiences aside, tries to explain them away, or just ignores them. It's like we lack the right categories or the vocabulary, maybe, to really deal with them within that framework.
Okay, and here's something I found really interesting. Kripal makes a point of saying he's not that worried about how someone interprets their experience, is he? Like whether they say, I saw an alien from Venus, or I had a vision of the Virgin Mary.
That's such a crucial distinction he makes. He's focused on the experience itself, the raw data, you could say.
Regardless of the label put on it later.
Yeah. Regardless of how someone's personal beliefs or cultural background shapes their story about it, he sees these moments as potential ontological shocks.
Ontological shocks.
Yeah.
Like reality glitches.
Sort of. Jolts that suddenly make our everyday world feel less solid, less certain. They hint that maybe consciousness isn't just stuck inside our heads.
Okay.
It might not be as bounded as we usually assume.
Kripal's big picture goal, it's more than just collecting weird stories.
Oh, much more. It's about fundamentally shifting our view, getting us to a place where we can see, as he puts it, the fantastic as real, the supernatural as supernatural, and the impossible as possible.
Wow. Okay, so recognizing these aren't just anomalies, but maybe part of the fabric of reality itself.
Exactly. He wants us to grasp that these events aren't errors or exceptions. He thinks they're integral parts of what he calls a deeply shared reality, one that doesn't neatly fit into the mind-matter split we usually rely on.
It sounds like he's trying to expand our whole definition of being human and our connection to the universe.
I think that's a great way to put it, yeah.
Now, how does he actually go about exploring all this? You mentioned he's an academic, but it doesn't sound like a dry, dusty approach.
No, definitely not. His method is quite distinct. He calls it thinking with.
Thinking with.
Yeah. And it's all about engaging with the people who've had these extraordinary experiences, engaging in a way that's, and these are his words, vulnerable, open, and often humorous.
Huh. Vulnerable and open. So
Yeah.
trying to really understand their perspective, not just analyze it from a distance.
Precisely. He treats them as genuine inquirers, people whose experiences might actually change how we understand things, how history is written, even.
So instead of starting with skepticism.
Right. Instead of immediately trying to debunk or explain it away within existing frameworks, he listens. He doesn't just dismiss accounts because they don't fit our current scientific models. He avoids pathologizing them, calling them delusions or whatever.
Yeah.
He listens very, very carefully.
And it's not just listening to people's stories, right? He pulls in information from, well, everywhere.
Oh, yeah. His approach is incredibly interdisciplinary. He's drawing from philosophy, religious studies, history, mythology, literature.
The humanities side.
But then he also brings in physics, neuroscience, evolutionary biology. He's looking for connections, for patterns across all these different fields.
And he's not shy about questioning the standard scientific worldview, especially materialism.
Definitely not. He directly challenges the idea that materialism alone is sufficient to explain everything, especially these kinds of phenomena.
Okay.
He suggests that these experiences often seem to point towards a reality that has meaning, maybe even a narrative quality, something beyond just random atoms bumping around.
A reality with purpose, perhaps?
Perhaps. It goes beyond a purely mechanical view of the cosmos.
And this connects to that idea of non-duality you mentioned earlier, which seems pretty central to his thinking. Can you unpack that a bit more? What does he mean by non-dual?
Okay, so Kripal proposes that these kinds of events and the reality they might be pointing to, they can't be easily shoved into either the mental box or the physical box.
Not just mind or matter.
Right. He talks about a potential third order of phenomena, something that's both transsubjective and transobjective.
Transsubjective and transsubjective, okay.
Yeah.
So crossing the boundary between inside and outside.
Kind of, or maybe erasing it. He describes these events as being simultaneously physical and material and LV spontaneous products of imaginative projection.
Whoa. Both at the same time.
Both. Happening both inside and outside at once. It blurs that line between the observer and the observed, between mind and world.
Okay, that's tricky to get your head around.
It is. He believes our ingrained habit of thinking in dualities, mind-matter, self-other, inside-outside, makes it really hard for us to grasp this potentially interconnected non-dual reality.
And where does imagination fit in this? Because we usually think of imagination as, well, not real, fantasy.
Right. But Kripal gives imagination a major upgrade. He elevates it significantly.
That's so.
He suggests it might actually be a kind of organ of truth, a crucial cognitive faculty that mediates between mind and matter.
An organ of truth. Wow.
Yeah. He sees imagination as maybe the primary way this non-dual reality expresses itself, often through meaningful images, symbols, stories.
Okay, I think I'm starting to see the picture. So the book itself, how is it put together to guide us through these really big, kind of mind-bending concepts?
Well, the structure seems quite deliberate. It moves us from looking at specific, often baffling experiences towards building a broader theoretical framework.
Excellent.
It kicks off with a prologue that hints at knowledge before its time, setting a certain tone, and then an introduction that lays the groundwork, exploring the fantastic foundations of reality, as he calls them.
Fantastic foundations.
Right.
Okay, then part one is when the impossible happens. What sorts of impossible things does he tackle there?
So this part really dives into specific categories of these experiences. Chapter 1 is called Words Are Experiences.
Interesting title.
Isn't it? It looks at the links between language, consciousness, and especially experiences around death. He plays with the idea that paranormal events might function like texts, that they have a kind of grammar or meaning embedded in them.
Like that wild story he includes about the woman struck by lightning.
Yes, and then she gets a phone call from her deceased grandfather.
Right. That's the kind of truly strange stuff he's willing to engage with.
Exactly. Then, Chapter 2, Why They Don't Land, gets into UFO phenomena.
Ah, the big one.
And he doesn't shy away from the weirder aspects, like reports of mantis beings.
Mantis beings, okay.
Yeah. But Kripal argues pretty strongly against simplistic explanations, like just extraterrestrial visitors in nuts and bolts craft.
So what does he suggest instead?
He thinks these encounters might be much more complex manifestations of this non-dual reality we were talking about, filtered through our cultural symbols, maybe even echoing mystical or religious themes, like parallels to the idea of the rapture, for instance.
So part physical, part psychological, part cultural symbol, all mixed up.
Something like that. He also brings up how these narratives can contain social criticism, and he mentions that intriguing account from a Pentagon scientist about seeing blue orbs.
Blue orbs, and the title, Why They Don't Land, that itself suggests they aren't just parking the spaceship.
Exactly. It points towards something maybe less physical or physical in a way we don't understand. He even briefly touches on the possibility of time travelers being involved.
Time travelers, too. He really opens up the possibility.
He does. Then chapter 3 is called That They Are Not Human. And this one takes a really interesting detour. It looks at alternative ways of perceiving reality, particularly perspectives linked to the autistic spectrum.
Okay. How does that connect?
Well, the suggestion is that these different modes of experiencing the world might actually give us valuable insights into non-human intelligence or realities that lie outside our typical sensory and cognitive filters. New ways of knowing.
Fascinating. Okay, then the book shifts gears in part 2. Making the impossible possible. How does he try to do that? Move from the strange events to a theory.
This is where he starts building the theoretical scaffolding. Chapter 4, The Time Swerve, introduces the block universe theory from physics and philosophy.
The block universe. That's the idea that all time exists at once. Past, present, future.
Exactly. All existing simultaneously, like frames on a reel of film. Kripal argues this model might help explain phenomena like precognition, seeing the future.
Because if the future already exists in some sense,
then maybe accessing information from it isn't metaphysically impossible. Our linear perception of time flowing might just be an illusion or a limited human perspective.
that recurring dream example he uses about the car crash, that really illustrates the point, doesn't it?
It does. It makes it feel less abstract. Then, chapter 5, The World is One and the Human is Two, dives deeper into the philosophical implications.
Okay.
He discusses ideas like dual-aspect monism.
Dual-aspect monism, meaning one underlying reality, monism, that appears to us in two ways, dual aspect, like mind and matter.
That's the gist of it. And the second part of the title, The Human is Two, suggests there might be a similar duality within us, maybe a conscious surface self and a deeper, larger aspect connected to that underlying reality.
It sounds like he's suggesting we're much more connected, maybe even entangled with the universe than standard materialism suggests.
I think that's definitely where he's heading, which leads into the really provocative chapter 6, We Are God and the Devil.
Whoa! Okay, that's a bold title.
It is. And here he explores the really radical implications and also the potential moral and ethical objections that come up when you start talking about the vast potential and maybe even the divine-like power inherent in human consciousness if these ideas hold water.
We are God and the devil. Yeah, that definitely suggests a huge potential within us for creation and destruction, good and ill.
It certainly does. It pushes the boundaries. And then finally, the book wraps up. There's a conclusion summarizing how to think impossibly and an epilogue called The Three Bars.
The three bars.
Yeah, it's kind of a practical distillation of his approach. Openness and this thinking with method, the importance of theory to make sense of it all, and then the connection from mind to matter. It's like his toolkit.
Okay, got it. So if we were to try and synthesize all this, what are Kripal's main angles on these core themes, like souls, UFOs, time, belief, reality itself? How does he tie it all together?
Okay, let's try. On souls or consciousness? He's definitely pushing back against pure materialism. He uses things like NDEs and precognition as evidence suggesting consciousness isn't just a byproduct of the brain, maybe it's more fundamental. He talks about a participatory universe, and that human is two idea fits here too.
And UFOs.
Not just ETs and ships, more like those ontological shocks we talked about, filtered through culture, potentially non-dual phenomena, possibly involving non-human intelligence, maybe even time travelers. And he stresses this is a global phenomenon, not just American or Western.
Right. Transnational.
Yeah.
And his view on time.
That's a big one. He really embraces the block universe to make sense of precognition. He suggests our everyday feeling of time flowing linearly might be an illusion, which resonates with accounts from mystical traditions about experiencing timelessness.
Okay, what about belief and imagination?
He's careful to distinguish the raw experience from the interpretation or belief system layered onto it, but crucially, he revalues imagination not as fantasy, but as a potential organ of truth, a bridge between mind and matter.
And finally, reality itself. What's his bottom line?
That it's vastly richer, stranger, and more mysterious than strict materialism allows. Fundamentally non-dual, perhaps participatory, meaning our consciousness plays a role in shaping it, and maybe, just maybe, it's structured less like a machine and more like a text, full of meaning and narrative.
Wow. Huh.
Yeah.
Okay. Maybe it would help listeners if we just quickly circled back to a couple of those impossible phenomena and explicitly link them to Kripal's framework again.
Good idea. So take precognition, seeing the future. Kripal uses this to challenge linear time and support the block universe idea. It suggests our awareness isn't strictly confined to the now. That recurring car crash dream is a prime example he discusses.
Right. And UFOs.
As we said, he leans towards non-dual interpretations. He emphasizes how cultural symbols shape the experience, the possibility of genuine non-human intelligence interacting with us in complex ways, maybe ways that are both physical and psychic. The reports of mantis beings, for instance, push us way beyond simple ET hypotheses.
Okay, that helps connect the dots. So really, the main thing for listeners to take away from all this is that Kripal is issuing an invitation, isn't he?
He absolutely is an invitation to expand our thinking, to broaden our definition of what's possible.
To take seriously these experiences that usually get swept under the rug.
Exactly. And to consider that maybe, just maybe, they offer profound clues about the actual nature of reality.
So maybe a final thought for everyone listening. As you go about your week, perhaps think about this. Have you ever had an experience yourself that felt, well, impossible, something you couldn't quite square with everyday reality?
Mm-hmm.
Could Kripal's way of thinking impossibly offer a different lens to view it through? It might be worth exploring his book further or digging into some of these topics that resonated with you.
Absolutely. Because this deep dive today, it's really just scratching the surface, isn't it? It's part of a much bigger, ongoing quest to understand the universe and our place within it. The search to understand these seemingly impossible things, well, that journey continues.